mountain time, and I am very happy to be here presenting on this topic. It's a passion of mine, acceptance and commitment therapy. One of the things I realized as I was going through these slides the last couple of days is that I am going to be hard pressed to cover all of the material that I want to in these slides. So I may end up generating more questions than I actually answer. If that's the case, I apologize, but I am happy to answer emails. So if you want to email me and keep the conversation going, or you have a question that arises from this presentation, this material, then feel free to contact me. My email address is john@evoketherapy.com. So without further ado, I am going to jump right into the material, especially since there's so much to cover. So I'm going to talk about acceptance and commitment therapy, also known as ACT. Just talk a little bit about what it is. It's a model of what we call psychological flexibility, and I'll explain that in some detail. And what we're looking at here is kind of a diagram of the ACT model. It's called the hexaflex, hence the 6 different sides and 6 different points. And it has the 6 core processes of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. So the first one is values. I'll just go around in a clockwise way. Second one is committed action. Self is context. And starting here, these last 4 are considered mindfulness-based processes. So self is context, cognitive diffusion, acceptance, and then contact with the present moment. And you'll notice that right in the middle of the hexaflex is psychological flexibility. So from the acceptance and commitment therapy perspective, the hallmark of psychological health is psychological flexibility. And I'll explain that, try to make it at least somewhat clear. All right, brief overview and brief history of ACT. Talk a little bit about where acceptance and commitment therapy comes from. It has its roots in behaviorism. And some of you, most of you maybe may have heard about Pavlov and Pavlov's dog. He trained his dog to salivate at the ring of the bell. So the conditioned stimulus was the ring of the bell, and it elicited this response of salivation. Then there was Watson and B.F. Skinner. And behaviorism really was kind of paramount in the treatment world from about the 1940s, very strong in the 50s, started before the 40s, started in the 30s, and maybe even the 20s, I'm not sure. And Skinner was writing into the 1960s. And then in the 1960s, the second wave of behavioral therapy came on the scene, and cognitive behavior therapy is considered a second wave behavioral therapy. Also, Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavior therapy is also considered a second wave behavior therapy. And the thing that really kind of differentiated the second wave of behavior therapies from the first wave is with the second wave came a real focus on cognition and examining the role that cognition plays in our psychological difficulties. So kind of making the link between thoughts and feelings. So examining cognition for irrational beliefs, dysfunctional attitudes, and CBT is still, it's probably the most widely recognized effective treatments for so many of our psychological difficulties. It's shown effectiveness with depression, anxiety, a very long list. And then in about the 1980s, the third wave of behavior therapies came along, and that's where ACT comes onto the scene in about the mid to late 1980s. And a guy by the name of Stephen Hayes is considered the founder of ACT, although, you know, there were others that worked with him, but he's really, I think, considered the founder of ACT. And then another third wave behavioral therapy is DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And a woman by the name of Marshall Linehan is considered the founder of DBT. And these are both, like I said, considered third wave behavioral therapies. Without getting too off track, one of the things that sets aside both ACT and DBT from second wave behavioral therapies is a real emphasis on the role of mindfulness, contacting the present moment, being able to look at our internal experience from a mindful perspective. That's germane to both ACT and DBT. So looking at ACT more specifically, to give a short overview, this idea of psychological flexibility, what is it? What do we mean by that? So it's helping people maintain meaningful behavior even when internal experience is difficult. Let me explain that a little bit. So what I mean by that is I use the phrase internal experience, and when I use that phrase, I use it as somewhat of an umbrella term. And what it covers is thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, memories. These all fall of internal experience. Other ACT practitioners might call it private events. Either way, same thing. So helping people maintain meaningful behavior even when their internal experience is difficult. In other words, they're having a difficult thing. And can they, in the presence of that difficult thought or feeling, maintain meaningful behavior, or what we call from the ACT perspective, values-driven behavior? And the idea is, can I create enough flexibility with my internal experience so that I can still move in the world in a meaningful, values-driven way? So I hope that makes sense, and I'll keep explaining that. That's psychological flexibility. Psychological flexibility. It's having that flexibility with a difficult internal experience. So from the ACT perspective, we focus on changing our relationship to difficult thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories. The word I want to highlight here in this bullet point is relationship. So from the ACT perspective, we don't spend a lot of time on explicitly trying to change a thought or a feeling. And for reasons that are quite interesting, but I think beyond the scope of this webinar, we don't have as much control over our thoughts and feelings as we think we do, especially during stressful times. Maybe we do a little bit when we're relaxed and conditions are just right, but I could go through a number of exercises that show us that we really don't. We have somewhat of an automatic relationship with them, in fact, or we can. But instead of changing focusing on changing the internal experience itself, what we focus on is changing our relationship to it. And from the ACT perspective, that's really where our power lies, is in changing our relationship to the internal experience, not necessarily focusing on making my bad feelings go away. And this last bullet point on this page here, expanding behavioral, I have to read it. This one really makes me feel like I got my money's worth out of my grad school education. Makes me feel really smart. So expand behavioral repertoires in the presence of aversive stimuli. What that means is aversive stimuli is a difficult internal experience. So we're talking about an internal stimuli. And so The idea is, can I have a difficult internal experience, thought, emotion, memory, and a constricted behavioral repertoire would be, I have a difficult thought or feeling and I get high, or I reach for the phone, screen time, I distract. It's kind of this automatic, narrow repertoire of behaviors that I go to when I have difficult or bad feelings. So that's a narrow behavioral repertoire. When we're healthy, we can have a difficult internal experience, but yet do something else, right? So instead of having a bad thought or a difficult thought and getting high, sure, that's still a possibility. That's still in the repertoire. But maybe I could also do A, B, C, or D. Maybe I could move in healthy ways in response to a difficult internal experience or a difficult aversive internal stimuli. So hope that makes sense. Then I will continue to explain it. So I am going to just jump right in now to the 6 core processes. And I know I'm going to leave a lot out. So if you know the ACT model, you're going to say, John, but you didn't talk about relational frame theory or functional contextualism. I know. But I'm going to do my best to get through the information. There's a lot here. So jump in. And the first core process that I want to talk about is acceptance. And one of the things that I really like about the model, one of the many, many things I like about the model, is that with clients, we can start really with any of the 6 core processes. But I would say most often, traditionally, therapists start with acceptance. So acceptance really, another synonym that I use for acceptance is willingness. And this is the idea of an acceptance of internal experience as an alternative to experiential avoidance. So if you look at our most common psychological difficulties and struggles, anxiety, depression, PTSD, the list goes on and on. If you go through the DSM-5, which is our diagnostic manual, many, if not most of those issues, those diagnoses, have an element of experiential avoidance in there somewhere. And I want to make clear that what I'm talking about here is not an avoidance of external experience, although that happens, but more an avoidance of internal experience. So willingness or acceptance is, can we accept the internal experience in the moment without attempting to alter or escape it in some way? So can we accept it for what it is? Can we accept a difficult thought or feeling for what it is without getting into one of these? I don't like what I feel, so I need to push it away. Avoidance. That would be experiential avoidance. And I talk to clients about this idea of, you don't have to, I'm not asking you to like the experience, the internal experience. I'm not asking you to want it. But I think on a more fundamental level, what I'm asking is, can you just be with it? Can you create room for it without getting into this, I need to push it away, or I need to fight it or control it? And I'll talk about, that experiential avoidance agenda, we call it, is just unworkable, especially in the long run. I try to help clients in relationship to this this core process get to a place that we call creative hopelessness. And it's not this kind of global hopelessness that I never affect change in my life and I'm just stuck and I always will be. It's not that. But it's more hopelessness in relationship to their avoidance or control agenda. So what we try to get clients to experience is, maybe my my ways of dealing with my bad thoughts, my difficult thoughts and feelings, maybe it's not going to work for me, at least in the long run. In the short run, yeah, it works. I mean, let's think of drugs and alcohol. It works, right? Otherwise, people wouldn't do it. But it has a big cost, right? And so it makes it more unworkable in the long run. So if we can help the client get to that place of recognizing that, excuse me, got a bit of a sinus cold. So if we can help a client get to a place of hopelessness, creative hopelessness, this is where the word creative comes in, where there's this recognition of, maybe my way wasn't working for me, or I can foresee that in the long run, it's not going to continue to work for me. Maybe I can try something different. Maybe, maybe I can get creative with how I relate to my internal experience. So acceptance, I love this quote. This is by Stephen Hayes, like I said, one of the founders of ACT. Acceptance is the work of helping a client to feel better, i.e. get better at feeling, in the service of living better. So there's a little trick here. He's not saying I help a client feel better. I take their bad feelings away. More so, what he's saying is I help a client get better at feeling. And that's what we're looking for. So, can I accept, can I feel, can I be in contact with these difficult thoughts and feelings instead of getting into this kind of automatic, reactive avoidance agenda of, I don't like what I feel, I got to get high. I don't like what I feel, so where's my phone so I can distract myself with screen time? I don't like what I feel, so I'm going to engage in sexual promiscuity. The list goes on and on and on. We can fill in the blank on that one. So there's a metaphor that I like when I'm talking about this this process, and it's the metaphor of the hungry tiger, and I'll talk through it pretty quickly. So let's say you open up your door one morning and there's a beautiful little tiger kitten out on the front porch, and you decide to bring it in and bring it into the house, and you start feeding it hamburger meat, and it's growing. You have to graduate from hamburger meat to steaks. Maybe you're feeding it steaks. This tiger's growing. Pretty soon you're feeding it full sides of beef, and before you know it, in a couple of years, you have a full-grown tiger who is pissed off unless he's being fed. He's ferocious, and so you have to keep feeding him. So the metaphor fits this way. Internal pain is the tiger, and experiential avoidance is the meat that we feed it. So in other words, the more that we feed the pain tiger by trying to avoid internal experience, the bigger and more voracious it becomes. It needs more and more and more. Sounds kind of like addiction, doesn't it? All right, next core process here, contact with the present moment. So contacting the present moment helps clients step out of their stories and into the present moment. And when I say stories, I mean core schemas, narratives, self-talk, all of the kind of stories that we tell ourselves about who we are and how the world operates. And we are always telling ourselves stories, whether we're aware of them or not. So it's this idea of stepping out of our stories and into the present moment. And so many difficulties arise when we get kind of entangled or ensnared, and the ACT word that I use is fused with our stories, with our narratives of who we are. They can become incredibly limiting, incredibly shame-provoking, et cetera, et cetera. So depression is often linked to past-oriented stories or thinking. It's when we look back and we ruminate, we perseverate about something that happened to us. We get caught in the stories about who we are. Often they're shame-based, and often the result is depression. And anxiety is often the byproduct of getting attached or ensnared or fused with future-oriented possibilities. This idea of what if this, what if I do this, what if she does that? In the field, we call it future tripping. And we'll say, hey, come back to the present moment. I had a teacher once who said, John, it's only when we are disconnected from the present moment that anxiety can grow. And think about that. And I'll say that to clients, and I'll say, when you are fully engrossed in the moment, whether it's busting a bow drill fire, whatever it might be, are you anxious? And I would say, I've been doing this work for, therapist for 4 years, a transitional coach for about 5 years, field staff for 10 years, for a long time. And I would say maybe twice someone has said, yeah, I can fully be engrossed in an activity and still feel anxiety. And I don't buy it. I mean, most of the time the answer is no. If we are fully kind of connected to the present moment, there's just no room for anxiety. And it's only when we kind of let our mind go into future scenarios, like what if, that worry begins to grow. So we kind of provide it fertile ground when we disconnect from the present moment. That's why we do so much in the field around, hey, come back to right now. Let's get in touch with your breath. What's happening for you? How can you connect with something of value in the here and now? And the present moment is really where new learning can occur. And it happens in this moment, and then this moment, and this moment. And we are, as ACT practitioners, we are certainly fans and supporters of going back and looking in the past and uncovering and talking about difficult experiences. That's for sure. That's absolutely for sure. That's vital. We need to kind of unlock and bring to light some of those past experiences so that we can begin to relate to them more flexibly. And we're also not anti-planning. So it's not like with our clients we say, the past is bad and the future is bad, so just stay present. That's not it. But we also recognize that there are definite points with either of diminishing returns where, okay, I've gotten what I need to out of looking at the future right now. I've done the planning. Now let me come back to the present moment and begin to implement the planning. So contact with the present moment undermines avoidance and struggle. When we lose contact with the present moment, we tend to get ensnared in our evaluations, judgments, and assessments of our thoughts and feelings, creating suffering. How do we foster contact with the present moment? Well, mindfulness. And there are 1,001 different mindfulness practices that we can use to help a client have an experience of being in the present moment. One of the meditations that I like, and this is also a meditation that is effective in demonstrating diffusion as well, but it's what's called a leaves on the stream meditation. And just to go through it very quickly, I'll ask a client to imagine sitting next to a stream, and then imagine whatever thoughts come up in the moment. Oh, this is dumb, I can't do this, whatever the thoughts might be, or this is peaceful, this is wonderful. Imagine those thoughts come up and you just pick them out of your head and place them on leaves that are flowing by on the stream. And it's kind of an easy but powerful visual experience, internally visual experience that can help a client see that, oh, that's just a thought and that's just a thought, and I can come back to the present moment and kind of let my thoughts come and go like they will. So the goal here is to help clients sustain patterns of ongoing attention to awareness of, and contact with their immediate ongoing changing experience without having to retreat from it or get pulled into their stories. So that's kind of a mouthful, but coming back to the moment, recognizing when they're getting pulled off into their stories, their narratives. Next core process is self as context. And this is juxtaposed with self as content. And I'll try to kind of illustrate that difference. So in self as content is this. It's attachment to our stories of who we are, the beliefs we develop about who we are, and the concepts we create that seem to describe our being. And the goal, the hope and so that's self as content. The hope from a place of self as context. By the way, a synonym for self as context is the observer self. So from the observer self or self as context experience, what we're trying to do is observe experience more freely and get on with living rather than struggling to eliminate negatively evaluated experience before meaningful behavior can be taken. I.e., when my depression goes away, then I'll live my life. So I had a Zen teacher about 10 years ago for a few years, and one of the things that he would say is, John, we live our lives this way. If only, if only, if only, if only, if only dead. And I think I think he was speaking primarily about kind of the external world and how we kind of grasp for things and status, but I think it also applies to the internal world. So many of my clients come to me with this kind of implicit assumption that once my bad stuff, my bad feelings, bad internal experience goes away, or when you make it go away, John, then I can live my life. But until then, I can't. It's, I just can't. And that's, I hear so many phrases, especially with my young adult clients. I work with both adolescent and young adults. But with my young adult clients, I'll hear phrases like, John, I'm stuck. I'm paralyzed. I've lost traction. On and on. Phrases, I would say 9 out of 10 clients, young adult clients, will speak to me like that. I'll hear a phrase like that. And it's because they've kind of made this implicit assumption that until I can get rid of my difficult feelings, I just can't live my life. So in other words, their internal experiences are dictating their behavior. And one of the things that I try to help them experience is that their difficult internal experiences don't have to necessarily dictate their behavior. And I'll explain that a little bit. So self as context. One of the experiences that I try to foster from this perspective is that thoughts and feelings, memories by themselves can't harm us. And it's only the action that we take or fail to take on their behalf that get us into trouble. And I've had some people say, well, John, no, that's not true. I know that if you think negative thoughts long enough, it has a repercussion on your health. And that's true. I am definitely a supporter of the mind-body connection, but this is the difference. So if you're relating to that thought, for example, this negative thought in a fused or entangled way, meaning you're spinning it over and over and over again, then yes, there is evidence that can actually affect your physiology, affect your biology. But if you're relating to that internal experience in a flexible way, then no, it can't. That thought or feeling cannot harm you. But it's only the behavior or lack thereof that you take on its behalf. That's where you get into trouble. So self as context, one of the things that I will often do, and this is a very simple thing I'll show you, is I'll ask a client to hold up his hands, his or her hands in front of them, and I'll say, tell me something that you struggle with. And maybe they say anxiety. And I'll say, okay, well, let's say that your hands are your experience of anxiety. Now slowly bring anxiety, bring your hands up to your face. Notice what happens to your experience of the world. Notice what it's like from here. Slowly bring your hands away, and I'll actually do it much slower with a client. And notice what happens to your experience of the world as you gain some distance from anxiety, for example. What I'm illustrating is there is the experiencer, or self as context, and then the experience, or the content itself. So self as content, where I'm looking at the world from my difficult internal experience. Self as context, where I've created some space between the observer self, or self as context, and the content. I hope that makes sense. So from here, this is a much more flexible relationship with my internal experience, right? Here, there's no room for choice. It can't fit. Here, there's plenty of room for choice. So it's this idea of, okay, there's a feeling of anxiety, and I could go get high. Sure, that's still in my behavioral repertoire, but maybe I could do something else. Maybe I could go to the gym. Maybe I could read a book, begin to open up that behavioral repertoire in the face of that aversive stimulus, the anxiety. So that's the idea with self as context. And the thing that I really like about this, and I've seen clients have very powerful moments in relationship to this idea. Because from here, when I've got some choice in the matter, it's like, oh, okay, I never really realized that I had choice in relationship to my struggles. I can do something else. I can engage in healthy behaviors instead of unhealthy behaviors. And that recognition in and of itself can be quite liberating. The other metaphor that I like to use, it's a simple one, easy one to grasp, is I'll point up at the sky sitting out in the field with clients, and I'll say, it's kind of like the sky. The sky can have the most violent of storms roll through, move through, and it's not harmed. It's just there. And right now, I'm looking out my windows. We are in the middle of monsoon season, and I was in the field a couple of weeks ago, and we had like golf ball, well, maybe 2/3 golf ball sized hail coming down. So we are in the middle of violent storms right now. And so, if they can become the sky, if they can look at their internal experience from the sky's perspective, then they don't have to get caught up in the storm or the content of their internal experience, right? They can create enough space to kind of let that internal experience do what it's going to do, but you're not getting hooked. You're not getting caught up and swept away in a difficult internal experience. So hope that makes sense. If not, shoot me an email. Next one, cognitive diffusion. I believe this is the last of the 4 mindfulness-based processes. So cognitive diffusion, or simply diffusion. From the ACT perspective, the ACT perspective asserts that it's not that we have the wrong thoughts, but that we spend too much time in them or looking from them rather than at them. Sounds familiar, right? Sounds like self as context. A lot of overlap here. So with diffusion, we make an attempt to what we call deliteralize or decontextualize thoughts or feelings or bodily sensations, so that the literal function of the thought, the literal functions of the thoughts are less likely to influence behaviors. And I'll explain that. I think the best way to explain that is by talking about this next bullet point. One of the things that I'll do with clients to help kind of illustrate and provide an experience of this process is I'll say, imagine a glass of milk. It can be cow milk, can be rice milk, can be soy milk, almond milk, whatever you like. But imagine a glass of milk. And I'll give them maybe 10 seconds to just imagine a glass of milk. And then I'll say, what I want you to do, it's going to seem weird, but go with me. For the next 60 seconds, you and I both are just going to say the word milk out loud over and over and over again. And I'll start. Milk, 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 milk. And we'll do that for 60 seconds. And typically, two things happen at the end of that 60 seconds. One is the word begins to lose at least some of its meaning. And two, other functions or other aspects of the word begin to emerge. Whether it's the sound itself or the sensation of your mouth making that motion in a certain way. So either auditory or kinesthetic functions begin to emerge rather than the literal function. And that word function is a bit tricky. It comes from the behavioral tradition. We could insert the word aspect there, and it might make more sense. So instead of the literal aspect of the word milk, other functions or other aspects of the word begin to emerge. And I might do this with a more meaningful word. So let's say I notice that a client is fused or joined with, fused, diffused. Let's say a client is fused with or burdened by a thought of, I'm just worthless, I'll never finish high school. I may take the word worthless and say, okay, for the next 60 seconds, we're going to say the word worthless over and over again. And again, the same thing happens at the end of that 60 seconds. And so what we're trying to do with that, and what often happens, is that a client can experience that worthless is just really two weird syllables that have joined together that I have imbued or given or surrounded with all of its meaning. Essentially, I've given it its power. And that's where relational frame theory comes in, which is kind of a theoretical foundation of ACT, and I don't need to explain it, but it's this idea of how we kind of create networks of meaning between words. And that's kind of a rabbit hole of its own, but diffusion is this idea of helping a client see that a thought is just a thought. And a thought consists of what we call, from the ACT perspective, internal verbal behavior. It's just words that we've associated together and we've given meaning. And typically we've given that word or that phrase so much meaning that it's dictating our lives in an unhealthy way. It's driving unhealthy behaviors. So there are many, many different diffusion techniques. One is the 3 N's, and I borrow this one from a guy named Russ Harris, who wrote a great book called The Happiness Trap. And the first 2 N's are noticing and naming. So the first N, notice, and that is simply, I am noticing what's coming up for me internally. My thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, memories. And then the second N, naming, is just that. I am putting words to my internal experience. And sometimes we'll do that out loud. I mean, I think the check-in that we use, the I feel statement, many of which you may be familiar with that. Or with some clients, I'll say, you don't have to check in all the time when you're naming your thoughts, but at least do it internally. At least name your thoughts internally. And I'll say, there's a slight language piece that's important here. So let's say I notice I'm having the thought that I am worthless. So if I notice it, when I'm doing it correctly, I'm saying, I notice I'm having the thought that I am worthless, instead of I notice I am worthless, right? So it's going from I notice I am worthless to I notice I'm having the thought that, right? Again, gaining a little bit of space between the observer self, or self as context, and the thought itself. And again, with that space comes choice and flexibility. This last technique, seen on a screen, very common in the ACT tradition. Many people use it. Many authors have written about it. And I think it's best explained by a client that I had and some work that he did. So I'll go through this pretty quickly, but so I'll call him Tyler, and he was 17 when this incident happened, and I got him. He was about 20 years old, and he had this very vivid memory of his girlfriend, high school sweetheart. They had been together, I think, since 8th grade, of his girlfriend breaking up with him. And what happened is her mother used to pick them up from school every day and drive them by his house, and he would go into his house and I think maybe grab his computer, maybe something to eat. He would hop back in her truck and she would drive him to their house, and he and his girlfriend would hang out for a couple of hours and he would go home. And he remembers vividly the day that she broke up, because his girlfriend got out of the car and followed him into his house. And he thought to himself, this is weird. She never really does this. She sat him down in the kitchen, and he remembers exactly the chair. He remembers what he was wearing, what she was wearing, and she broke up with him. And he remembers what she said, what he said. She left. He kind of began to hug himself, curled into a ball, and fell onto the floor. And I remember explicitly to this day, he said, John, I didn't know if I would ever get up off the floor. And that led to a cascade of kind of negative effects for him. A lot of drug use, difficulty in school. And so I asked him to play with this scene on a screen technique. And a little caveat here is you have to have a significant amount of rapport built with a client before I would ask him to do this, because it can feel belittling if you ask a client to engage in something like this, potentially. But I had great rapport, and I asked him if he'd be willing to engage in this. And I said, so what I want you to do right now in session, close your eyes. And I went through a little mindfulness activity to kind of center him, calm him, bring him to the present moment. And I said, imagine that scene, but imagine you're sitting in a movie theater, but you're the only one in the theater, and you're playing that scene out in front of you on the movie screen. And what I want you to do is play it through regular time. Just play it through regular time and notice what comes up for you. And then what I want you to do, and he would talk about it. And then what I want you to do is play it through double time, sped up. Notice what happens to the voices. Notice how people move. And he was talking to me about what was coming up for him. And then I said, now play it backwards once, regular time. Play it backwards once, double time. Play it forwards, half time. In other words, slow motion. Notice what happens to the voices, to the movements. And within about 15 minutes, he was laughing. And so we pulled him out of the exercise, and he said, John, if anyone would have told me that I ever would have laughed at this, I would have punched him in the face. Like, this ruined my life. But he had this experience that at this point in his life, all that's left of that experience is this image that he has. And as he plays with that image, the idea is he can begin to see it simply for what it is. It is just an image at this point, and it's nothing more. And I say just very mindfully, I am not trying to diminish, his experience with that image, but it is still just an image. That's it. And in and of itself, well, I'll put it this way, it doesn't have to necessarily continue to dictate his behavior in unhealthy ways. So that's an important experience. I am going to jump into the next of the 6 core processes. So the first 4, like I said, are all aimed at these last 2 core processes. In other words, the mindfulness is all aimed at helping us create psychological flexibility so that we can connect to these last 2 core processes, which are values and committed action. So I love this quote on the top of the slide here by Nietzsche. He who has a why to live can endure almost any how. So ACT is not concerned with teaching clients any particular set of morals, values, or virtues. And that's not unique to just ACT. Most good therapeutic modalities don't have a moral agenda that they're trying to impart. When I do ACT work, I very quickly with clients talk about the difference between goals and values. And I use a couple of, I highlight the difference in a couple of ways. I'll say, let's say going west for you is a value. So you can hike west forever, right? You can do circles around the globe hiking west. You can never fully get to west. Never fully achieve west. Whereas a value would be, okay, I want to hike west and there's a mountain in a westerly direction. My goal by tonight is to get to the top of the mountain. That would be a goal versus the westerly direction, the direction west itself being the value. Another way that I highlight this or illustrate this is, let's say I've identified a value of mine as being I want to be in a loving relationship. That's my value. So let's say I set a goal in service of that value of being married, getting married. And let's say I achieve that goal, I get married. Well, once I get married, it's not like I give up the value of being in a loving relationship, right? I mean, I can keep moving toward that value of being in a loving relationship, even though I've achieved the goal of getting married. So hope that makes sense. This concept, this next one is struggles and values are 2 sides of the same coin. This is interesting to me, and this is actually a fairly recent idea that I heard, and I can't remember where I got this one from, but it's this idea, and I'll use social anxiety as an example. So let's say a client comes to me, and he or she identifies social anxiety as one of their struggles, one of their difficulties. Well, if we view struggles and values as 2 sides of the same coin, and I have anxiety on one side, social anxiety on one side, if I just flip it over, it points to the value of I want to be connected. I want to be connected socially in healthy ways. That's the value. And I know it's a value because otherwise they wouldn't feel anxious about it, right? They wouldn't care. If you don't care about something, you don't feel anxious about it. So I like this idea of, if we can identify the struggle, the value's not too far behind. We just typically have to flip over the coin, and we'll find a value that we're not in accordance with, or we're not moving congruently with. And so then we can look at it from this perspective of, okay, how can I, instead of my behavior being dictated by the struggle, instead, how can my behavior be dictated by the value? That's an important question. So to highlight values, I'll go through maybe there are a number of different exercises, but one that I use is just asking questions like, if your struggles were solved, what difference would it make in your life? Tell me about the best day of your life. What do you want more of in your life that you don't have? These are all questions that help clients begin to uncover their values. And I say "their" very intentionally. Um, I really emphasize the importance of their values being theirs, not necessarily mom and dad's, or not necessarily what they think I think they should do. They need to be freely chosen and freely identified. And oftentimes, there's going to be a significant overlap with mom and dad's. But if they're going to be meaningful and powerful, they have to be freely chosen by the client. So, when I talk about values, I talk about shifting the focus from simply symptom reduction, that is making my bad feelings go away, my difficult internal experiences go away. It's not just a matter of making them go away. Typically, one of the reasons that I talk about not making them go away is because oftentimes the way that we try to make them go away backfires, and we just end up breathing life into them. And the other piece is difficult feelings and thoughts aren't going to go away because we're human. Part of the human experience is that we will experience pain. People die, accidents happen. Pain is part of this, experience that we call life. There's really no way around it. So I don't spend a lot of time on, we have to make your bad stuff go away and then you can live your life. Instead, how can I create a different relationship with my bad stuff, my difficult feelings, so that I can move more freely in relationship to my difficult experiences, internal experiences. So the phrase that I like to use is, I wonder if you can play, instead of just trying to control or push away or do battle with your bad stuff, your bad feelings, your difficult internal experiences. Instead, can you play a bigger ball game? That is, can more matter in your life than just this kind of push away or this battle with your internal experience? And I love this metaphor, and I use it often. The last bullet point on this page, life as a car. And I don't remember where I got this one from either, but I'll talk to clients about, let's imagine your life is a car. And the way that the kind of implicit assumption that you have right now, it seems to me, is that feelings drive your car. Feelings are the fuel for your car. What if we look at it this way? What if we look at feelings being the exhaust of your car, the byproduct of moving in the world in a values-driven way? And they'll ask, of course, well, if feelings aren't the fuel, then what are? Well, values can be the fuel. And understanding that when we're leading values-driven lives, deep, rich, meaningful lives, it's not always going to feel good. We're not always going to be happy. We might make mistakes, but that's okay. But typically, if we can continue to stay connected to our values and let our values dictate our behavior and how we move through the world, typically we will eventually have good feelings. We will eventually feel good. And for me, I really don't know any better way or any faster way to feel better than to move in a values-driven direction. Sure, drugs and alcohol, you can do that, but when I say feel better, I say feel better in a sustainable, workable way, than getting in touch with our values and letting our values dictate our behavior rather than waiting for the right feeling to come along. Oftentimes my clients will, they'll say, well, I'm just kind of waiting to feel better, therapy is going to make me feel better. And one of the things I'll say is, well, if you're just kind of waiting to feel better, you could be waiting a long damn time. And that can be powerful for them to kind of grapple with the idea of, what if feelings are just really the byproduct of the car, the exhaust of the car, rather than the fuel? So last of the 6 core processes, committed action. I haven't gone through this as fast as I was hoping to, but I'm glad you're still with me. Committed action. This is the idea of, the phrase that I use is beginning to move powerfully in the world again. And I have the word again on there purposely. Most clients, no matter how much they struggled, have had at least an instance where they've experienced some success. So that if values provide the compass direction, committed action describes the steps of the journey. It's really kind of the nuts and bolts of how we go about moving in the world. It's this deliberate process of creating a life consistent with your values. There's always an opportunity to link values to action. And let me explain that one. It's important. This one comes up in the field often. If a client, excuse me for wiping my nose, if a client is saying, and I get this pretty regularly, John, you want me to work on my relationship with my parents, and sometimes they'll say, and I do want to work on my relationship with my parents. How can I do that? I'm here and they're there. And you may see this in letters as well. Like, I need to come home so I can work on my relationships with you. And I'll say, well, so you value this relationship with your parents. That's obvious to me. An action that you can take in service of that value is writing them a letter. So there are always ways in every situation to link a value to an action. In the field, we have to be quite creative sometimes, but there are always ways to link values to actions. This idea, this next bullet point of leading a values-driven life will bring one into contact with something unpleasant. And I talked about that a bit earlier. When we're leading a deep, rich, meaningful life, sometimes we will experience hardship. That's part of it. But hopefully it's worth it. I think it is. So how do I address this core process of committed action? In the field, I'm a huge fan of SMART goals. And SMART goals, I think, comes from the business world. And SMART is an acronym for specific, measurable, attainable. The R, I've heard a couple of different things, either reasonable or realistic, and then timely. And I would say, one of my most common assignments in the field for my clients is I'll have a week where they're setting SMART goals, or sometimes 2 or 3 weeks, where they're setting SMART goals daily, but they're setting SMART goals that are in service of identified values. So I have this kind of a cheat sheet that identifies and describes 12 kind of common human values, and I'll give that to them to read, and they're welcome to choose off that sheet if they want, but they're also welcome to come up with their own. But I'll say, so every morning, I want you to, during breakfast, either get out the sheet or just think about a value that's important to you, and let a staff person know. And sometimes I'll say, let the group know as well what that value is. And then I also want you to identify a SMART goal in service of that value. And similarly, I want them to let staff or peers know as well. So an example that I give is, let's say you identify physical well-being as a value of yours. And so a SMART goal in service of that value might be doing 100 push-ups. And so at the end of the day, you check back in with staff. Sometimes you check back in with peers and you say, I either did achieve that goal or I didn't. And either way, I ask that they look at it from this kind of interested yet distanced in a healthy way perspective, meaning we're not trying to evoke a shame response if they didn't achieve the goal, but instead, okay, I didn't achieve that goal, but what can I learn from it, and how can I apply what I've learned from it to the rest of my life? Or if they did achieve the goal, same kind of pragmatic questioning. Why did that work out for me? How was I able to accomplish that? So it's really a practical, pragmatic process to help clients, one, get clear about what matters most to them in their lives, and then two, begin the very explicit process of identifying on a daily basis goals that they want to set in service of their values, hence beginning to move powerfully in the world again. And we're very explicit about this process, meaning we talk about it, we think about it, we share with others the process. And the idea is that if we are explicit about this process long enough, it begins to become implicit, right? It begins to become a habit, and that's what we want. All right, I am right at the hour mark, finishing up. So some take-homes. A few things. ACT normalizes struggles. So many clients come to us feeling so alone, so unique in their struggles, in their pain. And from the ACT perspective, we look at what they're feeling as part of the human experience. And I don't presume to say I know exactly what you're experiencing. I say, I don't look at the world through your eyes. I don't know everything you experience. But I think there might be some commonality between when I experience depression and what you call depression. And so just normalizing their experience helps them feel, that they're not so lost, that that no one can ever understand them, that they're not so broken. Another takeaway: pain is inevitable. So, I don't, again, subscribe to the idea of I have to make my pain go away before I can live my life. Good luck with that one. If you know a way to do that, that's healthy, let me know. This idea that experiential avoidance or control, that avoidance or control agenda, lies at the root of many of our psychological issues. And it's that I have to get rid of, or I have to push away difficult thoughts and feelings. Flexibility with internal experience, with the first 4 core processes that I described, is important in order to, next bullet point right here, move powerfully in the world. So that's one of the things I really love about this. It's very practical. It's not mindfulness just for the sake of mindfulness. It's mindfulness in order to live a more powerful life, in order to create the flexibility with our internal experience so that we can begin to move powerfully in the world again. And I will leave you with this acronym, and this is coming from Russ Harris, who wrote the book Happiness Trap. Great book, by the way, if you wanna kind of dive into acceptance and commitment therapy. And I would say about 80% of my clients in the field work out of at least portions of the book. So this acronym: accept internal experience, and with acceptance, I think implied in there is flexibility. Connect with values, and then take action. So I think a nice little acronym that kind of neatly sums up the ACT perspective. So I think I was on for about an hour and 3 minutes, something like that. Thanks for hanging out. I'm happy to accept questions, take any live questions. I don't see any. Alex, any questions coming through? Ah, got it. Okay. ACT is extremely useful model to explain, treat depression and anxiety, but what happens if someone is too emotionally dysregulated to respond to these cognitive strategies? Are therapies like EMDR consistent with this model? I would say the short answer is yes. I think therapies like EMDR, kind of the new kid on the block is brain spotting. I think they're consistent with the ACT model. I will also say that ACT is showing tremendous effectiveness with PTSD. As a matter of fact, I'm quite certain that the VA has been doing some studies with ACT that are showing a high rate of effectiveness with PTSD. But it's not one or the other, and I think both can be used in conjunction. I think EMDR with a bilateral stimulation can help access kind of fragments of memories that are stored both in the brain and in the body. And then the ACT perspective, I think, can help begin to make a healthier sense of them once those memories can be accessed. But like I said, I think of the client who had the memory of his girlfriend breaking up with him. And I couldn't give him the diagnosis of PTSD. It wasn't that powerful. But I think, there are absolutely some similarities, right? This intrusive thought that through this technique, he was able to gain some flexibility with and begin to create a healthier relationship with that internal experience, in this case, with that memory. So, but no, they're not kind of mutually exclusive, and I think they can work in conjunction with each other. Cool. I don't see anything else coming in. Like I said, I left a lot uncovered. And we're already an hour and 5 minutes into this, so I think I'll wrap it up unless we get any more questions. But feel free to email me, John, John, at evoketherapy.com. Let's see what we have here. We are always fans of parents attending Al-Anon meetings, CODA meetings, Families Anonymous, NAMI meetings. Essentially, do the work, get the support that you need while your son and daughter is with us or in aftercare or wherever they might be. Get the help and get the support that you need. You can check us out on our podcasts are up on both iCloud and I think Apple as well. iTunes, I mean. On the computer, you can go to soundcloud.com, search Evoke Therapy Programs, Twitter and Instagram at Evoke Therapy, Facebook, search Evoke Therapy Programs. You can find the Evoke Family Foundation on Facebook. And then we are always, as a team of Evokesters, doing blogs. And you can access our blogs online at this address here, evoketherapy.com /the Evoke team /blog /. Let's see, upcoming parent support groups. Well, we've got one coming up August 6th in New York. Also August 26th in LA and August 27th in the Bay Area. And I was fortunate enough to do, I think the end of June it was, I did the LA and Bay Area parent support groups for the first time. They were fantastic. So if you can attend one of those, I think you'll find them to be of great value. Contact Melanie at Evoke Therapy to ask questions or RSVP. I think I missed a slide there. Workshops. So coming up, we have a workshop here in St. George, Entrada, August 11th and 12th. I think I have a few parents going to that one. I always recommend attending one of those. They really give you, I think, a good feel for what your son or daughter is learning in the field. Their experience gives you a little taste of that. And it's also, I think, just a nice kind of supportive feeling to be able to tell your story in a place where other parents can relate to what you're going through in relationship to your son or daughter. October 13th and 14th here in at Entrada, I am actually going to be at least co-facilitating that one. So if you want to come to that one, that would be great. And then September 22nd and 3rd at Cascades, and then November 17th and 18th at Cascades. Contact Gail at Evoke Therapy to RSVP or for more information on that one, on those. We have our Pursuits Outdoor Adventure Trips. These are fantastic. 1, 7, and 14-day co-ed adventure trips that include mountaineering, rock climbing, canyoneering, and these I've heard Brad describe these as maybe Evoke Light. These can be kind of nice recharges for alumni. We can do these as families as well. So get in touch, and we can really work with you and customize one of these Pursuits trips. Any more live questions? Happy to take any of the last live questions. All right. Oh, can you please explain more on helplessness? Sure. So creative helpless, it's actually hopelessness, not helplessness. And it's this idea with creative hopelessness of kind of recognizing that that a client's agenda of control and avoidance, like I don't want to be with, I want to get rid of my difficult thought or feeling, my difficult internal experience. This place of hopelessness in relationship to that agenda of control or avoidance, meaning a recognition of, maybe there's a better way to relate to my internal experience than trying to push it away, trying to avoid it. What often happens when we're stuck in these avoidance agendas is that, well, you know, we have a difficult thought or feeling, and we go for the pot pipe, or we go for the drink, you know, or we go for screen time. We start engaging in unhealthy avoidance behaviors. And by the way, we can even use healthier activities or behaviors to avoid internal experience. Like, I can go to the gym because I don't want to deal with my difficult thoughts and feelings, and it kind of takes my mind off of these difficult internal experiences. So there are kind of healthier avoidance behaviors and more unhealthy or risky avoidance behaviors. But to get back to your question, that hopelessness is not this, like I said earlier, kind of a global hopelessness that I'll never change, or that I can't change my life, but more of a hopelessness in relationship to that avoidance agenda. I hope that makes sense. And from that place of hopelessness, there is instead this, okay, let me get creative. That's not going to work for me, at least for the long term. From here, let me get creative about what I might be able to do in the future. So creative hopelessness. All right, that is it, folks. I appreciate it. Thanks for hanging in, you all. And like I said, feel free to get in touch, john@evoketherapy.com, if you have any questions. And enjoy your weekends, folks. Take care.